Saturday, May 28th. It's just a bit past midnight. It's rapidly approaching 12:30 in the morning. Kay Baker is lying face on the ground in the yard of her neighbor. With every beat of her heart, her life is ending. Kay Baker has suffered a grievous, severe wound to her neck, one that starts to the right side of her chin and wraps almost 180 degrees around her neck to just past her ear. It has severed her carotid, her jugular, and her voice box. Blood is literally pouring out of her onto the ground, and the seconds are ticking closer and closer and closer to her death. As that's happening, a gentleman named Jonathan Figgins, who lives at 6211 Kite Ridge Drive, is on the couch. He's been watching TV, he's dozed off, and he hears a noise outside. He describes it as a thud. Says he hears a noise like a person in pain, a female voice. It is loud enough to rouse him from his sleep. And it startles him so much that he thinks it's his daughter upstairs who's in bed. So he runs up the stairs trying to find his daughter to make sure she's okay, and she promptly tells him, "Everything's good, Dad." Then he starts trying to figure out, what is this noise? He steps outside, and there he finds Kay Baker laying on the ground. She has already been attacked. She is bleeding out onto the grass of the neighboring home, 6209, the piece of grass that runs between Mr. Figgins' home and his neighbor. At first, he doesn't even realize what's going on. Kay Baker is so thin of frame that he initially thinks she's a teenager. He thinks that she's passed out because she's drunk. But when he walks over and he sees the pool of blood rapidly expanding beneath her on the ground, he realizes that something is wrong. Something is deadly wrong. About that same time, Mr. Figgins' wife, Ruth, who was asleep in bed, heard her husband yelling to the daughter, doesn't know what's going on. She comes outside. She sees exactly what's going on too, and she calls 911. And now law enforcement is on the way. But while that's happening, as they're waiting for law enforcement to arrive, Douglas Hicks, who lives at 6209, the neighboring home, the one on the other side of where Kay Baker is laying, he's heard a noise too. He was inside his home. It's 12:30 at night. He's up with his son. They're playing video games. They have the TV going. They've heard some strange noise too. Douglas Hicks will tell you he's heard some kind of movement outside, and he's heard the sound of maybe someone gasping or being out of breath, some sort of pained expression. And he too comes outside, and now he finds Kay Baker just as well. As all of this is unfolding, right about the same time, Jonathan Figgins hears the sound of movement in the backyard. You see, Mr. Figgins' home has a 6-foot-tall privacy fence around the backyard, but Mr. Hicks at 6209 does not. And so from where Kay Baker is, you can run straight into the backyard of 6209. And as you'll discover, Kay Baker lived at 6207, just the other side of Mr. Hicks' home from where she's found dead. And that backyard also doesn't have a fence. And so you can freely move from where Kay Baker is into the backyard of 6209 and into 6207. And Mr. Figgins hears a noise coming from the back area. Again, remember, he thinks initially when he first starts all of this, he thinks it's a teenager passed out in the yard drunk. So when he hears the noise, he initially thinks, oh, it's probably other kids, they're back there drinking or whatever. But when he realizes that this is not just some teenager passed out, he tells his wife to go turn on the light because now they're concerned that somebody's moving around in the backyard. And this is the scene that is unfolding as first responding deputies run up to the scene where Kay Baker is laying on the ground. By this point, her life has expired. Jonathan Figgins, Ruth Figgins, Douglas Hicks saw her in her last seconds of life. And by the time HCSO has responded, it's over. But still, they make a valiant effort. The first responding deputy, Deputy Ellis, runs up. She finds Mr. Figgins over the body, still trying to provide life-saving efforts as directed by 911. She takes over and she tries to provide CPR, pumping the chest, giving chest compressions, but it's no use. In the meantime, her partner, Deputy Strahan, has responded, and he hears Mr. Figgins comment that there's a noise coming from the backyard, or there was a noise coming from the backyard. And so immediately, Deputy Strahan starts to walk up the side of 6209, along the privacy fence to 6211, and immediately starts to see drops of blood on the ground leading into the backyard of 6209. And now they know that there has been some sort of movement. Somebody moved at some point. It either came from or it went into the backyard. So you'll hear from Deputy Wesley King, who along with Deputy Strahan and along with Deputy Ellis and other members of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, they begin walking around trying to figure out what's going on. They're not going to walk into the backyard of 6209. They know there's blood on the ground. They don't want to contaminate the scene. So they walk to the other side of 6209, looking to see if there's any evidence over there, and there they find the side of Kay Baker's home. And a window to a child's bedroom is open. The blinds are pulled up, and the screen that keeps the mosquitoes out from every Floridian home has been pushed out of the window and is on the ground. This immediately gets HCSO's attention. They're starting to figure out something is going on, but they're not quite sure what. So you'll hear how Deputy Strahan and Deputy Ellis go and move to guard the front door of 6209 because they don't know what's going on. They don't know if there's other people, the attackers, wounded, whatever the case may be, who might be inside 6209. And you will have a chance to watch the body cam footage. You will see Deputy Ellis first respond and find the body of Kay Baker as she was. You'll see the footage of Deputy Strahan first finding the blood on the ground. You'll see the footage of Deputy King finding the open window, and you will see the footage of as Deputy Strahan is standing guarding the front door, he realizes the front door is cracked open ever so slightly. The front door to Kay Baker's home is not fully closed. He tells his supervisor organizes a team of deputies, and they make entry into the home fearing that there are more wounded inside the home. And you'll be able to see that body cam. You'll be able to see that as HCSO came inside the house, there is nobody inside that home. You will see them go room to room. They check the kitchen, they check the garage, they move into the master bathroom, the master bedroom. And then what's left is a hallway on a split level floor plan that leads to the two children's bedrooms and the bathroom that children would normally share in common. And so the deputies start clearing the rooms. They clear the first child's bedroom to the left. That turns out to not be the room with the window that's open. They clear the bathroom. They look behind the shower curtain. There's nobody inside. But when they turn around and they start to walk out of the bathroom, the first thing they realize is the door frame to the bathroom is completely splintered and cracked. Indication that somebody had kicked in the bathroom door at some point, completely damaging the door frame and knocking the lock loose on the door. Right next to that door, that damaged bathroom door, is the last child's bedroom. And that door is locked. Locked from the inside. Not knowing what to expect, HCSO kicks in that door. They go into the room looking to make sure there's nobody else injured, and they discover that that room is empty as well. But just as they saw it from the outside, window open, blinds pulled up, screen pushed out. At this point, they realize that 6209, Miss Baker's home, and Miss Baker are connected, and obviously this is all tied together somehow. So things start to slow down. They set up a crime scene. They call up their crime scene investigators. They assign the detective who will process the scene on behalf of HCSO, and you will hear from those individuals. You will hear about how they came out. They took initial pictures of the scene where Miss Baker is. They take pictures of the backyard, and they start noticing blood everywhere. There's blood in the backyard. There's blood on the walls of 6211. There's blood on the walls of 6209. There's blood in the area where Kay Baker has fallen. They also realize that parked in front of Kay Baker's home is a silver car, a car that is ultimately determined to be the defendant's. Because as it turns out, you will learn the defendant and Kay Baker were in a relationship. They had been dating. He was living with her, and as I'll tell you in a bit, they had been together that evening. But at the moment, he is nowhere to be found. You'll see how HCSO went inside the home. They started documenting the inside of the home. And you'll see that Kay Baker's home was largely kept pretty clean. The dishes were mostly all washed. The living room was still in fairly good shape. Bedroom was a little rumpled from where people had slept in a bed, but otherwise the home was clean. And so the broken door is certainly unusual. And while that's happening, other HCSO deputies are trying to figure out where that blood might have gone in the backyard. They've figured out enough to know that the blood now moves from 6209 into the backyard of 6207. And as it turns out, on the far rear end of both 6209, just like all the other homes there along Kite Ridge Drive, there is a thick set of bushes and underbrush, some trees. And so they go around to the other side of the bushes. They're now on Lithia Pinecrest Road. The bushes don't exactly back up, but are pretty close to right at the edge of Lithia Pinecrest. And so the deputies pull around, and there on the other side of the bushes, on the back side of 6207, they can see more blood. And they can see that someone has gone through the bushes and trampled them down in the process. So, now having a blood trail running along a main thoroughfare, HCSO says, let's call out the dogs. They bring out a bloodhound. And you will have a chance to see the dog as it tracks. You will watch the deputy, Deputy Polito, as he points to the spot on the ground where the blood that has been discovered is marked. And almost instantly, the dog takes off, walking parallel with Lithia Pinecrest, walking for roughly the distance of a football field in the complete dark. Every once in a while, a car goes by, but otherwise, there's nobody out in this area. And it tracks and goes and goes and goes, and eventually, Deputy Polito realizes that unexpectedly, there is now again a giant pool of blood on the ground. But there's nobody around, nobody visible. He's been following what is arguably little tiny drops, and now there's something about maybe the size of a dinner plate worth of blood. So they call in the helicopter. The helicopter has thermal imaging. It can see if there's people moving about. Remember, the deputies at this point are walking along the edge of what is really thick brush, tall bushes, trees. They cannot see exactly what's going on, so they fly the helicopter overhead. It goes to the area where Deputy Polito and his bloodhound are, and the helicopter, the observer, the guy working the camera, says, there's a spot on the ground, and I don't know what it is. You'll learn that water retains heat, and so a pool of water could look like a person just as much as a person can. He says, but there's clearly something there in the bushes, within feet of where they're standing. And so bloodhounds are not trained to apprehend suspects. They're not bite dogs, as you'll learn. So they switch to another dog. And a second deputy, Deputy Hall, with his dog and his body cam, goes into the brush. And not long after he breaks into the brush, just to his right, he realizes there's a person laying on the ground. Matthew Terry. Matthew Terry is laying down in the darkness, in the bushes, concealed to some degree by tall grass. He is wearing a shirt and a pair of underwear and nothing more. He is instantly taken into custody. Law enforcement notices that he has 2 wounds to his neck, almost symmetrical, just on the other side of his windpipe. They arrest him, and you'll be able to see him. You'll be able to see him as he was when he was found. Shirt, underwear, wounds to his neck, nothing more. The defendant is also photographed. He's photographed both at the scene, before he's taken to the hospital, and then photos are taken again when he's at the hospital. And what you will see is he has no injuries to his face, no injuries to his legs. He has some thin lines running down his arm, long lines running down his arm. But otherwise, he's uninjured. As part of the processing, crime scene takes a swab of the defendant's right hand for the presence of potential DNA. And as you can expect, we'll come back to that in not too far in the future. So while that's happening, crime scene is still processing. They're taking photos of the victim, and eventually the victim is taken and an autopsy is performed later that morning. Dr. Ashley Perkins performs the autopsy, and you'll have a chance to hear from Dr. Perkins. She will talk to you about the things that happened during the autopsy, the observations that she made. You'll also hear about, as part of the autopsy, the victim's shirt, jeans, and nail clippings. They literally cut off portions of her fingernails, are all collected. You'll also hear how a swab is taken from the victim's neck to see if there's any DNA there that is suspicious. Simultaneously, crime scene is still working back at the home of Kay Baker. Inside the home, you'll see that they find a wire hanger, like a person might get from the dry cleaners. But for reasons that are not clear at the moment, the end of the wire hanger has been straightened out to make it long, a long, thin piece of metal. And HCSO, realizing this, looks at the door handles in the Baker home and realizes that the door handles that face out to, for example, the living room or the hallway where the bathroom was kicked in, have a tiny pinhole in the door handle that you could insert something long and straight and firm to try and unlock the door. And as they pay closer attention, they can see that the master bedroom door has been damaged too. There's a long, thin, vertical crack running down the side of the door, aimed directly at the locking mechanism. And on the floor of the bedroom, they find pieces of the locking mechanism from the master bedroom door. Now there's 2 doors that they've discovered have somehow been damaged. In that same area, they find a cell phone and a set of keys on a nightstand, keys that ultimately go to the defendant's vehicle, right next to a cell phone. They find another cell phone. That cell phone's in the kitchen, and you'll discover that that cell phone ultimately belongs to Kay Baker. But speaking of the kitchen, knowing that Kay Baker has suffered what the medical examiner will tell you is an incised wound, meaning a cut or a stab wound from some sort of sharp object, HCSO takes the time to try and find every knife in the house. They go to the drawer with the forks and the knives, and they look at all the knives, and those knives all have sort of wooden handles. They look in the dishwasher, and there they find some more knives. These knives are black handled. And then they look at the knife block in the corner of the kitchen, and they realize that 3 knives are missing out of the knife block. But 2 of those knives, steak knives, are sitting in the dishwasher. There's 1 knife missing. A 3.5-inch bird's beak paring knife is not in the block. And I will tell you now, a weapon in this case is never found. But certainly in that home, every knife that you would expect is there, except for this 1 3.5-inch bird's beak knife. Law enforcement is also now fully documenting all the blood in the backyard of 6209. And you're going to discover that there's blood going everywhere. There's blood that runs along the edge of 6209. There's blood that runs along the fence down 6211. So much so that when you go down the side of the fence that runs along 6211 facing towards 6209 and you get to the end of the fence where it faces towards Lithia Pinecrest, there's a bloody handprint on the fence. You'll be able to see the pictures of it. You'll be able to see the fingers. And so they swabbed that. They swabbed that handprint on that fence. And as you might expect, we'll come back to that too. But then there is blood moving through 6209 into the backyard of 6207. And in the backyard of 6207, you'll see there's a small little soccer goal, and there's like a jungle gym for kids to play on. And there is a trail of blood running directly from 6209 into 6207, headed directly towards the bushes in the backyard of 6207, just on the other side of where the blood was found by Lithia Pinecrest, and in the same place where the bushes were trampled down. And so you'll hear that samples of all of that blood is collected, but specifically some of the blood that's sitting on the net for the soccer goal is collected. And the actual leaf, the leaf from one of the bushes that has blood on it right at the start of the bushes as you exit out of 6207 into the bushes, heading towards Lithia Pinecrest, that's collected as well. And we'll talk about all of those again in a second too. You'll also see that law enforcement took swabbings from the area in the immediate vicinity of Kay Baker. You're going to see an unusual looking arch of blood about a foot tall at the very bottom of the wall of 6211 Kite Ridge Drive, the home of Jonathan Figgins. It's a near perfect arch. They swab that. They collect that sample too. And so now we have samples of blood from all over. In the meantime, other deputies are trying to figure out if anybody has any information about any of this. No one has actually seen this attack. Does anybody know what might have caused it? And as it turns out, as HCSO is on scene guarding Kay Baker's home, her neighbor at 6205, Nicholas Calicochi, comes home. Mr. Calicochi works at a restaurant called The Landing, and he is one of the chefs. But he's also the neighbor of Kay Baker, and as you'll discover, they became something of friends. And he tells law enforcement immediately, well, Ms. Baker and the defendant were just together not too long ago at The Landing. They'd been there all night, drinking and eating food and having a good time with some friends. And then Mr. Calicochi says something really interesting. He says, while they were there, the defendant accused Kay Baker of dancing with another man. And there was some sort of like disagreement or argument. And so, as you might expect, HCSO says, well, who are all these other people that are at the bar that might know what happened? And so, they discover people like Kelly Andrews and her husband Sean Andrews and Tara Johnson, who were all at The Landing that night. And what they will tell you is that somewhere there that night, around 10 o'clock-ish, Kay Baker got up and went to the bathroom. And we have the video, so you'll get to see it, though there's no sound. You'll see the defendant almost immediately turns and watches his girlfriend go to the bathroom. And when she does, he decides to get up and he follows her. She goes into the bathroom, he goes into the bathroom. And after Ms. Baker has a chance to use the facilities, she comes walking back out. And as it turns out, her friend, Kelly Andrews, is coming walking towards the bathroom. And having a good time, enjoying themselves, the two women have a short little dance party together. And when I say short, I mean it lasts all of maybe 5 seconds. As they see each other, they throw their hands up and kind of shake their hips and have a good time. And in that exact moment, some other patron in the bar, who is not a friend of any of these people, who is not with them at the bar, who just so happens to be walking to the bathroom at the same moment that Kay Baker is coming out and Kelly Andrews is going to the bathroom, he throws his hands up too. Doesn't actually dance with them. He just kind of throws his hands up and shimmies past them. And it's an exact moment. It's at that moment that the defendant is coming out of the bathroom and sees Kay Baker. And he goes back to the table. And you'll be able to see it. You won't be able to hear it, but you'll be able to see it. The defendant goes and sits back at the table with Sean Andrews. Kelly Andrews is still at the moment in the bathroom. And Kay Baker is talking with Nicholas Calicochi, who's off work at this point and sitting watching the football game. And the minute Kelly Andrews comes back, you'll be able to tell from the body language that she's telling the defendant that Kay Baker wasn't dancing with another man. You'll be able to see it plainly from her body language. But that doesn't dissuade the defendant. After being told by Ms. Andrews that Kay Baker wasn't dancing with another man, you'll see the defendant get up and he'll go over on video to Kay Baker. He brings her a drink. And initially, she regards him affectionately. They're standing close, they're laughing, they're talking, everybody's having a good time. They've got their arms around each other. And again, even though you won't be able to hear it, you'll be able to see the moment. You'll be able to see the moment the defendant turns, leans into Kay Baker, and her whole attitude shifts. And initially, they're talking, but you'll watch her. Kay Baker walks immediately to Kelly Andrews. The defendant takes the seat across from Kelly Andrews, and you can see the two women are now trying to convince the defendant that nothing was going on. Kelly Andrews was there, Sean Andrews was there, Tara Johnson was there, and they'll all tell you about this incident. They'll tell you what was said. They'll tell you what was happened since you can't hear it for yourself. You'll hear Tara Johnson say the defendant was getting upset at the thought that his girlfriend was dancing with another man. And at one point she tried to diffuse the situation and tell him, look, it's clear that Kay loves you. And it's clear that you love him because you're jealous. And in that moment, she will describe to you how the defendant's head whipped around and he says, I'm not jealous. I don't have anything to be jealous about. Eventually, the argument passes. The night proceeds. People go back to drinking, eating food, having a good time. And somewhere around 11:30, everyone is wrapping up to go home. It's just Kelly and her husband, Kay, and the defendant. And it's on video. You'll see them leave, get in the car, drive away. And Kelly and Sean Andrews stay behind because they're waiting for an Uber. And within minutes of leaving the bar, you will see Kelly Andrews get a phone call. And she will tell you what that phone call is. She will tell you that what's happening in that moment is Kay Baker is calling her again because the defendant, now an hour and a half later, is still accusing Kay Baker of dancing with another man. Kay Baker is having to call Kelly Andrews to say, please tell him again I wasn't dancing with someone else. And she'll tell you she can hear the defendant in the background. She tells him to quit being stupid or something to that effect. And he says, okay. That's at like 11:48. A few minutes pass, and when that does, Kelly Andrews gets the last text message known to ever be sent by Kay Baker. It says, LOL, sorry for that, so dumb, all good now. That's at 11:56. That is within 30 minutes of Kay Baker being found dead in her neighbor's yard. The last person she is with is the defendant. You'll hear how law enforcement took photos of Kelly Andrews' phone to document the time of the call, to document the text message that she received at 11:56. And you'll hear how they also eventually got access to Kay Baker's phone and found the same text messages in Kay Baker's phone, confirming that the conversation happened. You'll hear that law enforcement made an effort. They went out multiple times to the area where the defendant was found and to the backyards. They took metal detectors. One detective actually wandered into the bushes and found a hornet's nest or a bee's nest and got stung by it trying to search that wooded area for any sign of the knife, but no knife was ever found. And you'll hear about how pictures taken of the defendant, you might remember that I mentioned pictures were taken by the defendant when he was arrested and when he was taken to the hospital, were sent to a Dr. Kelly Devers, who also works for the medical examiner's office, and they asked her, Dr. Diaz, do you have any insight as to whether or not these wounds might be self-inflicted? Did the defendant injure himself? Is he the one who did this to himself? And I'll be very clear with you. Dr. Diaz is not going to tell you that she's 100% certain the defendant inflicted his own wounds. She'll say it's possible. She'll say it's also possible that somebody else injured him. But you'll also hear her talk about what are called hesitation marks. Hesitation marks are things that typically occur on the neck of an individual or any other place where a person attempts to inflict a wound on themselves in pursuit of a suicide. And they put, for example, the blade to their neck, like they're going to cut their own neck. And then as they start to cut, they hesitate. And so you'll see that she'll point out to you that on the photos of the defendant, he's got hesitation marks on his neck. But that will further be confirmed when the state of Florida puts in the evidence from the records taken from the hospital at Tampa General where the defendant was taken. And in those records, you will see, I will point it out to you, where the defendant admitted that he self-inflicted his own wounds because he was trying to commit suicide. It's there in the records. You will see it. Now, in this case, the state of Florida ultimately has three elements that we have to prove in pursuit of a first-degree murder. The first is that the victim is dead. And you will see a stipulation that is executed between the state and the defense, and that fact will be a given. Kay Baker is dead. We all know that. The second one will be that the defendant caused it, and as we discussed in jury selection, the third element will be whether or not the murder was premeditated. Did the defendant have time to reflect? Did he consciously decide to commit this murder? And you'll hear, just as we discussed before, the law does not fix an exact period of time. But as we also discussed, you'll hear that the defendant being intoxicated, having had drinks that night at the landing, is not a defense to this crime. And so as you talk about and ultimately determine what happened in this case, I will ask you to pay close attention to the things that will indicate to you the premeditated intent. The state of Florida will ask you to look carefully at the number of wounds that Kay Baker suffers. The number of times a knife or some other sharp object had to be plunged into her flesh. Because it's not just one wound to her neck. It's two. She's got this long cut along her neck, but you'll see there's actually two cuts there. You'll see how there's another mark just below her neck where she's been stabbed. You'll see another mark to the right of her neck along her shoulder where she's been stabbed. You'll see that on the back of her neck, she's got this jagged, almost sort of lightning bolt looking cut mark along the back of her neck. She's been stabbed multiple times. She's been cut multiple times. It has severed her carotid artery, her jugular vein, and her voice box. It has damaged the structures of her neck. This is not a thin slice across the neck. This is a blade fully plunged and pulled across the flesh of a person's neck. Flesh that Ruth Figgins herself will tell you is so cut open that as she looked at Kay Baker in those first moments when she saw her, she could see the bones inside her neck. You'll also hear about what is called defensive wounds. And the state of Florida will be perfectly honest. Dr. Perkins will tell you that she cannot be absolutely certain one way or another if Kay Baker suffered defensive wounds or suffered offensive wounds, meaning whether her hands got injured using the knife or being attacked by the knife. But you will see those pictures. And I submit to you that at the end it will become clear to you that those are defensive wounds. Kay Baker was fighting for her life. She's getting injured on her hands, on her neck, front and back. She's got one on her face. And the defendant, by comparison, has only 2 marks on his neck that he admits are self-inflicted. But beyond that, I want to go back to the DNA, the swabs that I've been talking about. You'll hear how we eventually got what's called a buccal sample from the defendant. a swab that was taken from the inside of the defendant's mouth. You rub a big Q-tip, you collect the DNA, and now you can get the defendant's DNA profile. And that allows you to figure out whose DNA is in any given swab that was collected. And so you'll hear how on the victim's neck, there's only the victim's DNA. The defendant's DNA is not there, but nobody else's DNA is there either. You'll hear how on the ground at the edge of the porch of 6209 where Kay Baker's head falls, there's only her blood. It's not the defendant's, but it's also nobody else's. And then we get to that blood arch on the wall. And you'll hear how that blood is only Kay Baker's. All the blood immediately around Kay Baker is Kay Baker's. You'll hear how the fingernail clippings that were collected, how under Ms. Baker's right hand fingernails, there's the DNA of another person. That man. The man she fought with. You'll also hear on the side of 6209, there's blood spatter. And that blood is Kay Baker's and that man's. You'll hear that the chances of it being anyone other than Kay Baker and the defendant is 1 in 700 billion with a B. You'll hear how on the swab of the fence, remember that piece of the fence where there's the handprint facing Lithia Pinecrest? It's Kay Baker's and that man. It's their DNA. 1 in 700 billion chance of being anyone else. You'll hear about the soccer net, the blood trail leading towards the bushes running through Kay Baker's yard. It's that man. It's the defendant. It's only him. When you get to the leaf, as you start to break into the bushes, traversing through the bushes, heading towards Lithia Pinecrest at what you'll come to know as red marker A, the evidence marker, red marker A, it's the defendant and that man. And you'll hear how on the defendant's own hand, his right hand, there's the DNA of two people. As you might expect, the defendant's DNA is on his own hand. But the other DNA on his hand is Kay Baker. You will hear all of that. As part of the testimony, the state of Florida will also call an individual by the name of Anna Cox. Ms. Cox specializes in what's called blood pattern expert, or a blood pattern analysis. She's an expert in blood pattern analysis. And so she can look at the patterns of blood, and she can tell you things about how that blood got there, whether it was dripping, whether it was cast off, whether it was just somebody bleeding, whatever the case may be. And there'll be a lot to talk about there, so I won't go into all of it. But what Ms. Cox will tell you is that blood arch on the wall on the side of Jonathan Figgins' home, that distinctive blood arch, she will tell you that in no uncertain terms, that is Kay Baker's blood, we know that by DNA, and that is Kay Baker's blood pumping out of her neck. She will explain to you how when your heart beats and constricts, the blood goes straight up your carotid artery, and if there's a giant hole in your neck, it shoots up because it's gaining pressure, and then as pressure drops, it shoots down. And so what she will tell you is that at some moment in this fight, Kay Baker is either laying on the ground, her neck exposed to the wall, but her back to the ground, or she is on her hands and knees, her face inches from the ground, when her neck is opened and her carotid artery sprays blood on the wall. There will be a lot to take in here. We'll approach somewhere in the neighborhood of 28 witnesses and over 60 pieces of evidence, photos, videos, physical items. We ask that you pay careful attention to all of these things and you listen to them, both the testimony that is given, but also the videos that are played. You look carefully at the photos. You contemplate the items that are put before you. It is the state's position that when you do all of those things at the end of this trial, one answer will emerge as the clear and obvious answer. It is that the defendant killed Kay Baker and that he did so in a premeditated way. that he chased Kay Baker out of the home. She is the person who fled out of the window. He is the person that would have had to come out the front door to chase her down and eventually catch up to her at 6209, one house over. That is the time when he is premeditating. That is the time when he is reflecting. And when you see all those things and you contemplate all those things, the state of Florida is certain that at the end of this trial you will return the only just verdict, which is guilty of first-degree murder. Thank you.
Is there anyone who would like to take a very short break before we turn to the defense opening statement by show of hands? All right. Defense ready to give your opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Bradley, you may proceed.